evening, students. I am HP Shrimal, Assistant Professor of English, Government College, Manglana. How are you? I hope you are all well. Today we are going to take up the next literary term, that is paradox. Under this topic, we will discuss definition and examples of paradox. We will also see the difference between a paradox and an oxymoron. Let's begin. First of all, we take up the definition of paradox. A paradox is a self-contradictory statement. Mark it. A paradox is a self-contradictory statement that seems absurd or illogical on its face, but turns out to have a valid meaning on second thoughts. Have you got it? A paradox is a self-contradictory statement. It means a paradox contradicts what it says, and that's why it seems absurd or illogical on its face, but it turns out to have a valid meaning on second thoughts. Let's see that there are two parts of this definition. We can divide this definition into two segments, and they are, first one is a self-contradictory statement. If you are asked what a paradox is and you are to reply only in a phrase, then you say that a paradox is a self-contradictory statement. In a single phrase, you can say that paradox is a self-contradictory statement. Self-contradictory means it contradicts what it wants to say, and that's why it seems absurd or illogical. Two incompatible things are there in a paradox, and that's why it becomes illogical, but turns out to have a valid meaning on second thoughts. This is the second part of the definition, and here you see on the screen that it is highlighted a valid meaning on second thoughts. It means when you see or understand in-depth meaning of that phrase or expression, you feel that it is true. It may happen. And that's why a paradox becomes very important in literature. Is that okay? A paradox is a self-contradictory statement. That is to say, a paradox contradicts what it says, and when we see the in-depth meaning of that expression, we feel that it's true. It may happen. Now the point is that the third thing you will have to understand about a paradox is that a paradox is never a phrase. It's always a statement. That is to say, it's a sentence. Is it okay? The basic difference between a paradox and an oxymoron is that an oxymoron is also a paradoxical utterance. But an oxymoron is not a sentence. It's not a statement. It's a phrase. For example, you have read in BA Part 2, Or to the West Wind. And for Or to the West Wind, the poet said destroyer and preserver. In a phrase, you see two things are juxtaposed, and they are quite contrary in ordinary usage. One is destroyer and the other is preserver. Similarly, in the very first stanza, you see unseen presence. Unseen presence. The poet is talking about the wind, west wind, and for which west wind he uses the phrase unseen presence. When somebody is present, he or she cannot be unseen, because one cannot be invisible. Is that right? And that's why unseen and presence are quite contrary in ordinary usage, and that's why it's an example of oxymoron. But again, you see that the wind cannot be seen, the wind can only be felt, and because of that, we feel that the wind is present here. Is that right? So that's logically true. However, however contradictory it seems, but it has some logic. Is it okay? That's true about an oxymoron, but a paradox happens only in a sentence, only in a statement. Okay, then the gist of what we have read so far is that for a paradox there must be a self-contradictory statement, and number two thing is that it must have a valid meaning on second thoughts. Is that right? And the third thing is that for a paradox there must be a statement or a sentence. It never happens in a phrase. Is that right? Let's see some examples of paradox. The child is father of the man. This statement was asked in RPSC grade 2 exam, and when you go through this statement, the child is father of the man. On the one hand, you are telling us that that's a child, and on the other hand, you say that he is the father of the man. How is it possible? How can a child be the father of a man? Child is a child, and a father is naturally, but it's but natural that when somebody is when somebody is a father, he must have passed a certain age. Isn't that a child cannot be the father of a man, and therefore it seems contradictory on its face, isn't that? But when we see the deeper meaning, we find that the child of today will be the father of tomorrow, and therefore the sentence is logically correct. The child of today will be the father of tomorrow, and therefore the sentence is logically true, and that's why we say that it's an example of paradox. Is that right? Now we see the second example, that's from Milton's Paradise Lost. Milton says, dark with excessive bright thy skirts appear. Excessive brightness results in whiteness. When something is very bright, extremely bright, that appears white. And when we say that something is extremely bright, it means that is extremely white, and something which is extremely white, it cannot be dark. Getting my point? I repeat, when you say that something is bright, it automatically means that it's white. And when you say that something is extremely bright, then you say that it's extremely white. Brightness is synonymous with whiteness. But the sentence says that something is dark with excessive bright. Because of extreme brightness, something becomes dark. Is it possible? Not possible. It's illogical. It's absurd. It's nonsensical. Dark with excessive bright, thy means your. Its skirts means gown, appear. Because of excessive brightness, your skirts appear dark, which is illogical, which is nonsensical, which is absurd. But now you see the deeper meaning of this sentence. Dark with excessive bright, thy skirts appear. Milton is talking about God. When God appears, the dazzling of his skirts was too much that Satan could not see anything, and everything appears dark to him. And that's why Milton uses dark with excessive bright thy skirts appear. When, for example, in your day-to-day life, if you look at the sun for a while, the sun is shining, the sun is dazzling, and you try to look at the sun. Because of the dazzling of the sun, everything appears dark to you after a while. The same thing happens with the Satan. When Satan looks at God, the God's dazzling skirts appear dark for him, and that's why it is logically true. And so we say that it's an example of paradox. Let's see one more example. War is peace. When you are talking of war automatically means disturbance, problems, turmoil, etc. But the sentence is war is peace. How is it possible? This is absurd. This is nonsensical. This is useless, baseless. Isn't that? But when you have fought a war with someone, after the war, either you or he will survive. Whoever will survive will live with peace. Isn't that? That's true. After war, one of the parties survives and the other perishes. And one who survives will live with peace. Isn't that? and therefore the sentence is logically correct. Freedom is slavery. Both are quite opposite. Freedom cannot be slavery. Isn't that? Therefore the sentence seems illogical or absurd. But you see the deeper in-depth meaning of this sentence. Once you have got freedom, you have got at the same time, a burden of responsibilities. Freedom brings responsibilities, and responsibilities make a man slave. And therefore, the deeper meaning is absolutely correct. Ignorance is strength. You might have heard of Tulsidas, Goswami Tulsidas. It's said, it's a myth. He climbed a wall using a snake, considering the snake as a rope. He was ignorant and therefore he considered the snake a rope. If he had known the fact that it was a snake, had he dared touch it? Had he dared touch it? No, because when you know the dangers of something, you become a coward. And therefore, ignorance becomes strength. In ignorance, you could do what you are unable to do with knowledge. And therefore, the deeper meaning of the sentence is absolutely correct. Isn't that? Now, we take one more example. This is also asked in RPSC exams. And this example is from John Donne's poem, Death Be Not Proud. One short sleep past, we wake eternally. And death shall be no more, death thou shalt die. Look at the phrase which is highlighted, death thou shalt die. Look at this sentence. Death, you will have to die. Death, you will die. Death does not die, but death kills in an ordinary sense. And that's why this sentence seems absurd to us. But you see the deeper meaning of these two lines. What is death? Death is nothing, but only death is nothing, but it's only a short sleep. And in a jiffy, you reach heaven. When you reach there, you are present there, but death is not there in heaven. And therefore the poet says, one short sleep past. Death is nothing but a short sleep. It's just a nap. And we wake eternally. We become immortal because we reach heaven. And death shall be no more. There will be no death in the heaven. And therefore, death thou shalt die. Death you will die, because you will not be present in heaven. And someone who is not present is dead. This is the logical meaning. And therefore, that's an example of therefore it's an example of a paradox. Was that right? I hope now you understand the meaning of paradox, and you will be able to find it out. I want to recapitulate the three things we have read about paradox. Number one is that for a paradox there must be a statement or sentence. Number two is that for a paradox is a self-contradictory statement. And number three is that it must have a valid meaning on second thoughts. Is that right?